Hello and welcome to Be Lifted Up, your guide to living an abundant life. I'm your co-host, Alfred Edmond Jr., with a very, very special edition of Be Lifted Up Radio. Listen, we have today, all to ourselves, the Honorable Reverend Dr. Ambassador Suzan Johnson Cook, who has been a guest on the show before. She's been a guest host, but now she's here in person just to split time and share word with us. Listen, she began her career, obviously, I don't know if she knows I know this, she's coming full circle because she started her career in TV as a producer for news affiliates in Boston and Washington and Miami, but she's best known as a globally recognized faith leader. She was the first female pastor in the 200-year history of the American Baptist churches. She was an ambassador at large for international religious freedom during the presidential administration of Barack Obama. I mean, I could go on and on and on about all the things that she's done and does. I mean, she has enough of a resume that she could retire right now, but she is still laboring faithfully, doing great work. So listen, you're in for a treat. She's a wonderful person, a wonderful woman, and a wonderful woman of God. Be right here, sit tight for Reverend Dr. Ambassador Suzan Johnson Cook. Welcome to Be Lifted Up, your guide to living an abundant life. I am so excited because rarely do we have a guest of this magnitude who's done this much service in so many areas of leadership, all to ourselves. And then she's just a wonderful person to hang out with. So listen, we have today with us, again, a U.S. ambassador at large for the international religious freedom under President Barack Obama, the first female pastor in the 200-year history of the American Baptist churches. I could go on and on and on into all the things that she's done and has been doing. But what I love most about her, and again, I've known her for such a long time that sometimes you're like amazed at how God is keeping her going because she's still fresh and doing bigger and better things every day. It's amazing. It's like the fountain of youth. God is just blessing her over and over and over again. So listen, without further ado, I don't even want to hold her up. Please welcome to the show, the Honorable Reverend Dr. Ambassador Suzan Johnson Cook. Oh, Dr. Sujay. Oh my God, I'm so excited to have you.
I'm excited to be here. Thank you for that introduction. And we have gone back, we do go back a long time. We've known each other for many, many years. But let me just thank you and salute you for the work that you're doing and you've done as well. So thank you for having me today. And we got to give a shout out to the executive producer, Gwen Franklin, who brings so many wonderful people together and reconnects us. So it's good to see you.
Well, yes, Gwen, everybody knows, is the founder and creator of Be Lifted Up Radio, and she just blesses us all the time. But I'm not kidding, Dr. Sujay. I mean, I remember when I first came to Brooklyn, New York, started out working at the Black weekly newspaper, Big Red News,
Yes.
college. And to me, you were a legend then because of the quality, just the impact that you were delivering even then. Talk to me about probably one of my favorite things about the journey that you've followed as you lived a God-filled, purpose-filled life to do so many amazing things. I mean, just talk about your journey a little bit. First of all, a lot of people would have stopped and said, yep, I did that, I'm good. But you keep coming up with new things to do that really makes a broad impact. I can't think of too many people that have had so much impact in so many areas of leadership that's very diverse, but again, very focused on a life of service and faith.
Well, thank you for the question. So I was watching Joel Osteen recently, and his theme was "You are blessed," and that you're set apart and you're anointed to do many things. And so I was set apart to live a life of service. I was born into a family of civil servants. My father was one of the first Black trolley car drivers. My mother was a Black school teacher in Harlem. And so by day they were civil servants, and by night they built a family business, one of the longest running Black family-owned businesses in New York State. But they had faith, So I didn't have to wait till I became an adult to discover who God was. I was born into a family of faith, and I was born into a village of many African Americans who said failure is not an option. So I was around success all of my life. I was around joy all of my life. The church had parties. We used to go to Renaissance Ballroom in Harlem, and the whole family would have a table. So I learned how to dance with my father and my father's friends, who we called my uncles and aunts. And so it was always good, clean fun, where there was not a separation of this is your Sunday you and this is your Monday, Tuesday, Friday night you. We were always expected to be whole and God-loving people, and people that just were founded in family and faith. And so because of that, I always had a support community that was saying, I was like 5 years old learning to read Dr. Seuss, Run, Dick, Run. And they were like, so what college are you going to? And I was like, but that was the expectation, that you're starting to think about where you're going. You're not going to just stay right here or become stagnant. So all the way through high school and through college, I had this supportive village, an extended family. My neighbors were friends. And I used to live in this building called the Executive Towers on the Grand Concourse overlooking Yankee Stadium. And it was one of the first buildings that African Americans of success were moving into. It had been a Jewish community before Co-op City. And so to come into that community, you had many different ethnicities on the same floor with us. We lived on the 20th floor, had 17 apartments, and there were Albanians. And so we just grew up as friends. We didn't say there's the Albanian over there and there's the Jamaican over there. It was, we are friends. And so our parents used to have these parties. Every time a Black family moved into the building, there were these parties and all the kids would come. So we had these intergenerational, fun-filled, kind of what I call my family now, Black socialite events. And then on Sunday afternoon after church, and people came from many different churches, we would be at my parents, who were the matriarch and the patriarch of our family, would be in their living room. And they used to say, go introduce yourself. In other words, you're not going to sit on the side like a wallflower. You're going to make sure people know who you are, and you're going to be the host. And I think that's where working the room really happened in my life, because they would really work the room, and personality was discovered, and conversations were discovered, and we were embraced again by these communities of love. So I think that's, the kind of the key to my success. And that was the roots of my success, having a strong family. And I miss them terribly, but they were the Johnsons.
Yes.
And so it was a proud thing to be a Johnson in our community.
One of the things, and I can think of a number of people, but I want to talk about our late founder. When I say our, Black Enterprise founder, Earl Graves. And you and him, and obviously he was, born and raised in Bed-Stuy, Brooklyn, have this trait that I associate with all great leaders. And it's not what most people think. They accomplished this and they own that and they had this title and that title. My, litmus test for great leadership is that you're able to walk among the quote unquote common so-called lowest of the low, or you're able to walk at kings and presidents and never change who you are, have a positive impact on everybody, but there's no environment or no group of people that you're uncomfortable with, or more importantly, there's no group of people who you make feel uncomfortable by how you interact with them. It's that, I guess they call it the common touch, but it's common whether you're with paupers or kings. And that's what one of the things that made our late founder Earl Graves, Senior, the founder of Black Enterprise, special. But it's also one of the things I've always associated with you. I mean, you again, ambassador, doctor, all the things. But like you said, you know how to,
and then pastor of people who were in the housing projects.
Yes.
So you have to really kind of do it all. And so it's interesting because the late Earl Graves became my neighbor in this historically African-American community we spent in the summer called Sag Harbor.
Yes.
His house is 3 doors from mine. And so his sons are still in the community, his grands. And then Susan Taylor's across the street. Johnny Cochran was next to him. And so we all ended up in this community, not having grown up together. Certainly they were a generation in front of me, but we were neighbors. And because of that, our kids and our kids' kids played together. Dr. Earl Graves' grandson became my youngest son's roommate when they both finished Princeton together. So, the world is small. And I think, again, it's about being surrounded by people, like you say, who walk with kings and queens and very comfortable, but we don't lose the touch of talking to people every day. My mother was especially, my parents in general, but my mother was especially being a school teacher in Harlem where there were children who were on welfare. And one of the things my mother said, back then they didn't call people homeless, they called them bums. And she was like, you speak to everybody. And those were the people who protected us on the streets and said, Miss Johnson, you bringing Susie today? And so they knew me. But the other thing my parents did, my mother would bring home school children every weekend to our home. We had moved up to the Bronx. There was a time when Black middle class, as they were becoming middle class, either moved to Queens or to the Bronx from Harlem. And so ours was in the Northeast Bronx. And she would bring children home every weekend and they would share the bedroom with us. And there was no differentiation. If we went to the park, we all went to the park. If we went to Coney Island, we all went. And she would put money in their hands. And so they were like brothers and sisters. And there was this wonderful thing about learning to respect everyone. There were no big I's and little U's. And this is a story I have to tell because back then women on welfare were also what they call cleaning ladies. Yes. And welfare would send them to your homes. And we had this tremendous turnover all the time. And so I found out later, my mother would find out what was their dream. And she would say, you want to go to nursing school? And she would send them to nursing school. She says, you're not going to be on welfare. And that was the life I grew up with. And so I learned how to be generous. I learned how to be loving and kind. And that's the mantra for my life.
Well, let's hold that thought. Guys, you're listening to Be Lifted Up, your guide to living an abundant life. We have Reverend Dr. Ambassador Suzan Johnson Cook dropping gems and mics all over the place. Stay tuned. We'll be right back. Welcome back to Be Lifted Up, your guide to living an abundant life. I'm Alfred Edmond Jr., your host for today, and we are here with the Reverend Dr. Ambassador Suzan Johnson Cook, who I will now just call her Dr. Sujay or Ambassador Sujay.
I love it. Thank you.
All those titles. But, you know, listen, we were talking about this, the last segment about how your mother treated the least of these and kind of set an example for you of how your parents, but your mother in particular, set an example for you. And that resonates with me because people know me as they know me now, you know, Senior Vice President at Black Enterprise and, you know, keynote speaker and host of shows like Be Lifted Up. And, you know, and I have to remind them that's not how I came here.
Right, exactly.
So I am the oldest son of a divorced single mother who raised children on her own, on public assistance. And while I did not have when you're growing up in it, all I knew was I was loved and I was cared for, and I came from a big family, and it was grew up in a working class community, even though I was in a working poor household, you know.
Yes.
And now I know in hindsight, my mother was very intentional about, we may not be able to have the best house, but I'm going to try to put you in a community that you have a chance to thrive. And, you know,
exactly.
And my late beloved mother, I'm say her name on the air to honor her, Virginia Edmond. But
yes,
I'm one of those kids that your mother would have, you know, or my sisters or my brother would have brought into the house and said, listen, you know, and that means something to me. It's one of the biggest things that drives my passion for mentorship today. And I got armies of mentees because I'm like, I need to go out of my way to find me when I needed somebody to show me that there was a bigger world, there was bigger opportunities.
Yes.
That ministry is foundational to everything that we call ministry. But talk about that in terms of your journey.
And so let me offer my mother's name, Dorothy C. Johnson. She wanted to make sure you did that C for Cuthbertson, Dorothy C. Johnson, and my father was Wilbert T. Johnson. And so my father, next to my mother, first of all, I understood what partnership was about. They worked hard, they worked together. So whoever got home first, you know, my father usually got home earliest because he, like I said, he was a trolley car, which became the MTA. And so there was dinner made every day by whoever came home first, a home cooked meal. And my father cooked as many meals as my mother did. And so we worked in flow and partnership. There were no roles like the girls do the dishes and the boys do the garbage. No, everyone did everything because we were a family that flowed together. And I think you said a word that was really important, that you said thrive, because we were not just trying to survive, we were about thriving. And we had to strive to do that. And so my father, as the business was starting, back then it was mainly men. It was a WatchGuard security agency. It is a WatchGuard security agency that he started. So I became the first secretary for the corporation, and I was just an elementary school, but they were planting seeds of business and success in me. And so the uniforms, people got their uniforms in the basement of our houses. It was a coat rack, and they would come and try on the jacket and the pants in our little washroom. And my father, it was very important to him that men had food on the table at the end of the week, that they could be men and feel like men. Eventually women started working as security guards, but back then it was men. And so he found jobs that men could do. So he had bazaars and grocery stores, Fedco grocery store back then by Bruce Llewellyn. Yes. He made sure that we had guards there. And so he went around and found work, and he would take me with him for the overnight shifts. If a man didn't show up, I'd be in the car and I watched my father. And so I saw this couple that just would not take no for an answer. It was like, yes to success. Yes, we are blessed, and we are blessed in order to be a blessing to others. And so now that I translate that as I try to mentor a generation, particularly of Black women ministers, who are mentoring another generation of Black women ministers, and try to sow into them the importance of, we have an opportunity not only to do better, but to bring others along. So it doesn't matter if you're first. That's not the goal, to try to be the first. It's a matter of what you do with the spot God has given you. And, are you going to just stand on it and do nothing? Or are you going to bring as many people? So when I was working in the White House, as a White House fellow, you could only bring like 6 people in at a time if you worked in the White House. And I had busloads of African Americans who would come down, and I said, I got you in. And the Secret Service would look at me, and I was like, look, this is the last load. This is the last time. But I kept trying to do, because who could get into the White House except if they had entree through someone? And so there were many people I brought in like that. And so it became fun for me. And people knew they could trust me, that I was never going to abuse it. But it was just going to be an opportunity for me to open doors and not shut them. So I think that was, the trajectory I was born into. And so we had this great beginning. So how do you not just walk a path that's already been made for you? How do you not just walk down this road? Now, I've experienced sexism and racism and ageism, because I was very young doing things, but I really never concentrated on that. It's like, so you close the door here, well, there's another door open over there, and that's the door I'm going to walk through.
You do what I call it. You refocus on the goal, not the obstacle. We assume
I love it. The R words, you refocus
on the goal.
Exactly.
But the other thing that you trigger, you really touched on that reminds me of something I say all the time to people. I tell it, to be the first, and in our case, to be the Black first, is not an achievement, it's an assignment.
Oh, that's my word. Say that again.
To be the Black first is not an achievement, it's an assignment.
That's right.
If we look up in 10 years from now, they're still talking about, remember 10 years ago, we had Alfred do that thing that nobody's done since then. I was like, you didn't do your assignment, because
exactly.
It should be in the context of who came behind you. And so this is very important. And it's very interesting to me that you said that, because that is an example of ministry. Yes, you got through the door. God gave you access to get through the door, but the blessings he gives to us is not just for us.
Exactly.
And, we're supposed to be vessels, not containers.
Oh, I'm going to write this down. We need to write a book together of good things. I'm loving it. I wish I could take notes, but that's it. I mean, I had 3 presidential appointments, but they were assignments from God.
Yes.
And if I didn't understand the assignment, I would have blown what God allowed me to do. So I remember, I went in as a White House fellow, which is a very competitive job. And so they choose out of 2,000, they choose 14. My 30th year class reunion was just a few weeks ago, and we went to the Legacy Museum. I want to talk about that with Brian Stevenson as a class. But in the White House, people, I thought I had to go in knowing healthcare reform, and I had memorized Time magazine and all of these things. And when I sat down, they said, you're the preacher, right? And they wanted to talk faith. And so I realized God had placed me there for God's reason. And so all of these people, Secret Service, all of these people were like, well, we have this Bible study. Can I come into your office? And I became the pastor in residence, although that was not my title. That domestic policy analyst is what got me in the door. But God said, I want to use you while you're here. And that's made all the difference.
So I want to delve deeper into that. We have a few more minutes in this segment. If we don't finish, we'll take it in the next segment. About, okay, you were born in a family of faith. So was I. I'm a grandson of a minister, ministers and pastors in my family, deacons, etc. in my generation, previous generation, and now a whole new generation coming up behind me.
Yes.
But I'm fascinated by the fact that because of your experiences, where you can and have done anything you could have been a corporate leader if you wanted to. You could have been an entrepreneurial CEO if you wanted to. You could have had a career in politics and policy if you wanted to. And in some ways, you've done all of those things. But, and if we try to address it now, but if we have to continue in the next segment, we will. Often people who become faith leaders, I find fall into two groups. There are those who see that leadership role as a limiting role for the impact it can have outside of church, if you were traditional leadership. And then there are those that say, no, this is a foundation for my ministry in many other areas that I can impact, and that I should impact. And especially as a woman faith leader, because you face, racism, sexism, ageism along the way. How did you know, or how did you keep yourself open to the calling? First, the calling to ministry in the first place, when you could have felt called to do so many other things, and then knowing, no, I should be in the White House. I should be leading this organization. I should be the first senior pastor of this, and not feel like, no, that's not my lane. I should stay in my lane. So listen, I'm getting the wrap for this segment. We're gonna listen, guys. You can tell how excited I am. We're here with Dr. Sujay. Just Google her. Trying to find everything you need to know.
Google our other hosts too. Thank you.
Yeah, exactly. But we'll be right back. You're listening to Be Lifted Up, your guide to living an abundant life. Welcome back to Be Lifted Up, your guide to living an abundant life. We're here with Dr. Sujay. Dr. Sujay, as we close the last segment, I did a long rambling question about what really boils down to is you not only hearing your calling, but following your purpose wherever it leads. And when someone is so multi-talented, I'm like you, I got a lot of interests, a lot of talents, a lot of abilities. And there are people who get lost in that. They end up in the wrong places because everything you're good at is not necessarily the thing God wants you to do at that particular point in time. But to me, you've been really effective, at least from the outside looking in, at navigating without losing yourself, with allowing God to use you in a variety of ways, but never losing, I guess, the North Star of where you feel the Holy Spirit is leading you from day to day, week to week, month to month. Now, of course, everybody who reads anything about anybody in the Bible knows it looks easier. Then you read the stories, you understand it wasn't as easy for Moses or Ruth or whoever you want to look at. But talk to me about your approach as a woman of God, as a faith leader, to be able to know God has me here in the White House for a reason. God has me, taking this role with the American Baptist churches for a reason. And I'm going to do that, which means I'm not going to do these other things that I'm capable of doing, but it's not the time to do. How did you navigate that?
So, in the last segment, you used the word call, and it's about the call. It's not necessarily a cause, it's about the call. And all of us are called to different causes. And, so many times you realize that God had you there after you completed that assignment. I've wrestled with it sometimes, when friends are rising up the corporate ladder, but I never competed. I think what for me was I was comfortable in my own skin and with where God had placed me. I think also a couple of things. With my parents having worked, there was a financial level that allowed me to move forward without stress of finances. And I think that that's a major piece. So in college, I got checks. I did not have loans. And so I think that's a big piece for African Americans to not have to do something or not have to stay in a job where they're not treating you right just because. And so I always had this freedom to walk away if I needed to, but I also had the freedom to know when I was called to stay. And that's even through problematic times, because I felt that God showed me clearly how to handle struggles when they were in my congregation. There was a time trustees were trying to take over because I was a woman, and God put the people in my path who showed me how to navigate that. Things like becoming the first female chaplain for NYPD wasn't something I sought. I was doing a lunch hour service at Mariners Temple. It was really the first mega church. We didn't call it mega back then, but I had 1,000 people at lunchtime who would come from City Hall and the private sector and from the police department. And in the front row were these people they called the brass of the police department, who came every Wednesday at lunchtime. And so they went back to Benjamin Ward, who was the first African-American police commissioner, and said, we have this Wednesday pastor, so make her a chaplain. She's bringing on. And he said, okay, bring her to me. I didn't even know there were chaplains for NYPD. I didn't know that there was a job. I didn't know they paid you. And so I think things in my life have happened like that. Someone either would speak up, someone would show me things. It wasn't like I was striving to be the first. I don't think you try to strive to be the first. And so there are seasons of life and there are appointments of life that only God can do. And so if you walk where you're supposed to be and you do it well, and for many times with very low pay and sometimes with no pay, but if you know you're called to do that, then you serve with everything you've got. I remember my mother, and we were upper middle class by this point. And she came down to my first church, and they were like broken down bathrooms. She's like, you sure you called to do this? She's like, the broken down toilets. And I think I was making $9,000 a year. I mean, that's not even on the radar. And I said, Mom, called to be here. And from that pulpit, Harvard came, the NY Police Department chaplaincy came, my White House fellowship came from that church that nobody else wanted. The men wouldn't even candidate for it. They would drive past it. They were like, a black church in Chinatown, no thank you. And so the way I got it was I preached as a guest preacher the week before the pastor resigned. Didn't know the pastor was going to resign. The congregation didn't know the pastor. So they were like, well, we got this young girl who just preached last week. Why don't we come and ask her to be interim? The church had dwindled down to 15 people in a building that held 1,100 people. So the optics of it were, oh man, this is dying. I thought, well, the glass can be half empty or it can be half full. So let me fill this thing up. And so I began to use the talents. My late brother was an assemblyman, the first Black assemblyman in the Bronx. And so I knew how to go door to door and knock on doors. I used to know how to do subway stops and pass out flyers. And that's exactly what I did to build my ministry. I would stop at the subway where everybody would get off of downtown and say, we have the service coming up on Wednesday. And then I would knock on the doors in the housing projects and say, will you just come to my church? And when I would walk through the projects, they put the wine bottle behind their back. They had the respect, but they said, okay, you came to my house, I'm going to come to your church. And one by one, 10 by 10, family by family, what was once 15 people grew to over 1,000 people. So and the time they said women can't do it, God said, yes, they can.
There's three things that I want to touch on that really resonate with me. One is the idea, and this has served me many times in the course of my career, when I either was about to make a move that's on one level looked like it made sense, but the Holy Spirit was telling me it didn't make sense. And that remembering that it's about the source, not the resource. So there were times when, especially when I was editor-in-chief of Black Enterprise magazine, there was like a 5-year period where then was Time Magazine Group was coming after me to try to get me to leave Black Enterprise to go to Fortune or Yes. And it was tempting because that's Time Magazine Group. They were the big kahuna in the business. They could afford to outpay me. They could afford to, and every time I came close, and I won't go into detail because we're talking about your story, not mine.
No,
but
it's exciting.
The Holy Spirit was like, it looks good on paper, but that's not where you belong. Where I have you is where you belong. And 37 years later, I'm still at Black Enterprise. So
I love it.
But it's this idea of it's not about the resources, but the source.
I love it. Yes.
The second thing, it was this idea of being obedient. that even when it doesn't make sense to you, I tell people obedience, trust, and love are the same thing with God. They're all three the exact same thing.
Yes.
If you say you trust him, then you're going to obey him because you trust him, not because you have to do it, because you trust him.
Yes.
And that trust is an expression of love. And you are being obedient when it didn't make sense to anybody around you, including your mom.
Exactly.
The other thing I want you to talk a little bit about, and I think it was something that you said when you finished your ambassadorship, I think, as international religious freedom under the presidential administration of Barack Obama. And I don't want to say it. I'm going to hint at it and let you say it. But you've never been shy about this idea that you can be a faith leader and a servant, but still make a good living. That you don't love the money,
right?
But you've never been conflicted about your willingness and right to command wealth in the marketplace, compensation in the marketplace for the value you're bringing to the institutions that you serve. Talk about that, because a lot of faith leaders struggle with that.
No, I mean, we have value. I'm 67 years old, so I've been on this planet 6 decades plus. I started working at age 14. I make no apologies for making money now. I've earned it. I deserve it. I'm good at what I do. I'm called the queen of inspiration. I do that through books, through preaching, through keynote speaking, through mentoring. And so I've earned it, and I have no issues with saying, I'm worth it. So, like you said, I could have been when I came through television as a producer, I was one of 2 Black producers nationally in the time. I was like 23 years old. And I was making $60,000 with ABC, which now is like the equivalent of $350,000. But God called me. So I walked away from that and went to seminary full time and did what God called me to do. And because of that, doors were burst open in many arenas, not because of what I did, but because of God trusting my obedience. And so I think you don't have to apologize for that which you're good at and that which you're good at and what you've done to help people. It's still a fraction of what corporate America makes, but I'm doing well. It's also about investing. One of our shows, we talked about investing, life insurance, Social Security payments, and then putting money away. With our denomination has a wonderful, wonderful pension plan, which I started at age 23. And so pastoring for 40 years, that's going to build up, and they invested well. So everything I did, I earned honestly, not on the backs of people, and everything that I put away, I deserve now to be compensated for. And so it's making wise choices. I'm having parents who showed me how to make wise choices. They came from sharecropping in this generation to building wealth. And so for them to build wealth and me not to build on that really is the sin and abomination. So I'm walking in the season and in the calling and the purpose which I was called to do.
Listen, everybody, I hope you're taking notes. You may have to listen to this whole show again. You're listening to Be Lifted Up, your guide to living an abundant life. I'm with Dr. Sujay. We will be right back. Welcome back to Be Lifted Up, your guide to living an abundant life. I'm here with the Honorable Reverend Dr. Suzan Johnson Cook, who we just called Dr. Sujay. And listen, Dr. Sujay, we were talking about the juxtaposition of faith and finance and the difference between embracing the prosperity that God offers you for obedience and service, but at the same time not being beholden to it. You have people that don't want to answer their calling because of what they're afraid they're giving up. And you've been on both sides of that and navigated that. And it just reminded me of the scripture, 1 Peter 2, verse 16, live as people who are free, not using your freedom as a cover up for evil, but living as servants of God. And when you do that, your provision will come, and it'll be more than you can think, ask, or imagine. But sometimes we do get caught up in, well, I can't let that go, and I can't let this go. And we really get caught up with the resources as opposed to staying focused on the source. Talk to me about not only how you've experienced that and navigated that in your own life, but how that impacts the way you lead others, whether it's entrepreneurs, members of your church, and other people who read your books and do those other things. This idea that you are free.
I'm totally free. There's another scripture. I'm young, but I'm old now. I've never seen the righteous forsaken. And I have a history with God, and God has a history with me. So I know God, and I know how God performs, and I honor God. And so I don't worry about things I don't need to worry about. My family set me off on a path, which was great, but I've also worked hard, and so I've worked hard to have choices and to have the freedom. Invested well, did what I needed to do, put my two sons through undergrad with no debt. But I worked to make that happen. And sometimes that was having a couple of jobs on the side from pastoring if my church couldn't afford. But it was, again, knowing the source and staying with that source. So I think that was really important, to kind of stay focused on God and not to be sidetracked by what the world kind of offers you. I'm God's child, and I'm very clear on that. That's why I pour into others now, another generation of Black women ministers who really are the first generation of Black women who can mentor another generation of Black women. I had some wonderful mentors, but they were all men. If you're the first female, they were all men, and they were older men who poured and deposited into me. Only maybe one is still alive now. And I think that's another key, to have people who've been where you're going, who can talk sense into you or hear you as you're kind of babbling, and they're like, okay, now take a breath. You've moved a lot of times, settle down now, and to be able to accept their wisdom. And now I'm in the seat of sage and matriarch. And so I try to find people who want what I have to give. There are a couple of people who are like, I've had enough of this. Well, okay, I release you to your next season. I'm not upset, but I release you to your next season, because now you can't stay here because you don't want what I have. And so I mentor. I'm building a global Black Women's Chamber of Commerce, which is the first chamber of commerce just for Black women business owners, globalblackwomen.org. And again, I know what can be done. If I can inspire you and try to bring some people together who are doing what you'd like to do, or just put some ideas, masterminds, they call them now. If I can bring you around people who have mastered their crafts, then that's what I'll do. And so the call continues in many different ways now. We're able to be called ambassadors for the rest of our life. So I think what's really nice now, freedom is, I'm not aspiring to do something or be something. And so I'm not hungry for what you have. I'm not competitive with who you are. I am very comfortable with who God called me to be. And so this is the real me. If you can't accept that, then we're not going to be in the same space comfortably. But that's not my problem. That's yours. And so I really just kind of have a really good head. One of the scriptures I took as I traveled I had 199 countries in my portfolio. And one of the scriptures I took was a form of the Jabez prayer. Lord, increase my opportunities that I may touch more lives for you, that you may get more glory. And if you kind of keep that in mind, that it's not about me, it's about what God has allowed me to do and the places God has allowed me to sit. When I sat down at the diplomatic table, the meeting began. When I stood up, the meeting was over. I was like, okay, God, you're the bomb. And this is the last story I want to tell. So the Pope Benedict. Now, as a Black woman Baptist pastor, I would have never been invited to the Vatican to sit with the Pope. As the U.S. ambassador for international religious freedom, not only was I invited to the Vatican, but his entourage said, will you come and pray in the Pope's prayer chambers with the Pope?
Look at God.
Only God can do this. And so to appreciate it, not get big-headed about it, but say, God, I accept your assignment, and that's my life.
I do a lot of media, both as a public speaker. There was a podcast I was a guest on around vibrant living, and I think we even talked about it on one of the segments that we co-hosted about, for us. And I know you're a woman of faith, and I know we're on a faith-based show, so I know you're not lying. But when you said your age, I was like, I thought I was older than you are, because to me, I still think of you the way you were when I met you.
I know we freeze it there, right?
But it's interesting that I tell people that we are of that generation for whom two things. One, what was considered the fourth quarter for generations before us is really halftime for us.
Yes.
So much great work we have to do, and God has given us enough life and vitality to do great work. So I'm like, no, I'm at halftime, and now I am operating with a certain freedom that we started this segment with you're right. I'm not chasing a promotion.
Right.
I'm not trying to get to, I'm not trying to kick my way up the corporate ladder. I'm at Black Enterprise because I want to be at Black Enterprise and they want me. Not
Exactly.
because I'm trying to get someplace. And that gives you freedom to just be your best you.
Exactly.
At giving the best service without some of the things that might have impacted you. Well, I'd say me when I was younger and I was trying to strive and compete for me versus make meaningful choices for a purposeful life so that God could say, well done, thou good and grace, good and, servant, whether I live another 5 years or 25 years, or my prayer every day is another 40 years. But there's a freedom when you're not encumbered by all of that. And you're just God put me in the best place where I can do the best work.
Exactly. I sleep well at night. I try to eat well, I try to do it right. But it's just a joyous place to be. I'm sitting out in my summer home, looking at, they're getting ready to fill the pool. So with Zoom now, everybody's on Zoom. So in the summer, I Zoom first of all, I take July and August off. That's my time. Nobody gets a piece of it. I'm in my shorts and bathing suit, but when I had to make meetings like up in June and it's still hot, I'd have my jacket on. And then when the segment was over, I'd jump in my pool. The bathing suit would be underneath. So I've created the life I want to live. So I said to my sons, they're adults now. I said, put on my tombstone, she loved the life she lived and she lived the life she loved. And that's what I'm about. I'm loving the life I'm living. And it is my best life now, but it's always been my best life. I've really tried to honor God, but also have a great, fun, balanced life. So I work with professionals. We do a faith-based wellness retreat every year called Selah by the Sea, where it's an intentional pause. Just stop for a minute. You can put this aside for a minute and take 4 days to pamper yourselves. Now, it costs us an upscale retreat, but we have 60 people who come every year because they're like, you know what? I need this. I'm getting something out of it. There's value in it. And so just Selah for a minute. So Selah with Sujay and Selah with your life. And we take the busy, the BUSI out of business. And that's what I try to do. Like, have a good, healthy, balanced life.
This is so amazing. Time is flying by. Guys, you're listening to Be Lifted Up, your guide to living an abundant life with our special guest, Dr. Ambassador Sujay. Listen, Dr. Sujay, normally we don't have the guests included in the wrap, but please come back for a few minutes. I want to again give the audience a chance to hear from you, where they can learn about all the wonderful things you can do and how to follow you on social media. So will you come back with me for our 2-minute wrap?
I'd love to. Thank you.
I so appreciate it. Listen, stay tuned, guys. You don't want to go away. We'll be right back with Be Lifted Up, your guide to living an abundant life. Well, this has been Be Lifted Up, your guide to living an abundant life. I'm your host, Alfred Edmond Jr., and we just had a wonderful time with you, Dr. Sujay. Not that I'm surprised, but I'm still impressed. But listen, just so I can make sure our audience can really keep up with what you're doing and how they can follow you and get more gems of wisdom, as well as great programming and things that you're doing, what's the best way for people to stay in touch with what you're doing?
Well, I really like LinkedIn because it is the business place. And I'm Ambassador Suzan Johnson Cook on that, and also on Facebook. But there's also Instagram at Ambassador_Sujay, and Sujay is spelled Sujay. My favorite place though is YouTube. I have a show called Live with Sujay, motivational moments for those who are running fast. You get 1 minute, but I also have a lot of shows. Live with Sujay on my channel, which is Ambassador Sujay on YouTube, and that's my favorite place because I like the camera like you do. But it's such a joy. But if you want me to speak, go to charismaspeakers.com for my keynotes. And we're building this Global Black Women's Chamber, and it's globalblackwomen.org. And you'll be blessed. Just find me and I'll be glad to find you back.
She's telling the truth, and the camera loves you back. And you love the camera's loving you back. It's really great. Listen, guys, you're listening to Be Lifted Up, your guide to living an abundant life. Catch this show at beliftedradio.com. You can also find us on the Mocha Podcasts, pluralpodcastnetwork.com. We're on Be Lifted Up Radio. Make sure you add the radio and the letter B, Lifted Up, on Instagram, X, Facebook. where you can, and YouTube, where you can get some other content. And check us out on Sirius XM 140, Sirius XM 141, HUR Voices, if you want to catch us on satellite radio. I'm Alfred Edmond Jr. Thank you for joining us for Be Lifted Up, your guide to living an abundant life.